Hey, how's it going? Welcome back. In this video, we're going to be talking about booking speakers and booking talent. Now, like I've said a few times, there are a bunch of different types of events that you could be throwing, and it's definitely possible that you don't need to book talent or book speakers for your event. However, I do think if you're in the events industry, it is good to know how this works, because at some point you might need to book some speakers, or you could help out one of your friends or partners that's also in the industry that's trying to book speakers or talent. I think it's a good skill to have, and it's definitely relevant if you are going to be booking speakers or talent for any of your future events. But if this isn't relevant to you at the current moment, you can skip it and then come back when you are throwing an event that requires you to book speakers and talent. All right, without further ado, let's get into it. So the first thing that I want to cover is how far out should you be booking speakers and talent for your event? See, most of the events that I throw are corporate events, and even though it's not really proven that speakers help sell events, I do think they really validate your event. Once you have speakers or talent booked for your event, it shows the public that your event is real. If I'm going and looking at the website of an event or a concert or a festival, whatever it is, one of the first things I look for is the people speaking at that event or the people that are performing at that concert or festival, whatever it is. And that's because that it shows that it's real. Now, of course, they could be lying or faking it, but that's pretty unlikely. But if there's an event or a concert that has absolutely no speakers or talent listed on the website or anywhere to be found, that's when I get a little suspicious. This actually kind of happened to me during the first event I ever planned. We started selling tickets to this event before we had any speakers signed. So we were essentially just selling this hypothetical event that we promised was going to happen, but we had no proof that it was actually going to happen because it was our first event. So we had no B-roll, no footage from previous events, and we had no speakers associated with the event. So really, we were just hoping that people would trust us that we were going to put an event together. And yeah, some people bought tickets, but I definitely think it hurt our sales by not announcing a speaker sooner. So now my current rule of thumb is by the time I am announcing and launching an event, I want to have at least 2 speakers signed. And typically I want those 2 speakers to be the headline speakers or the keynotes, which are the ones that are going to draw the most attention and are going to be the ones that most people know about. Like I said, I really don't have any data to prove that speakers sell tickets. However, from my experience so far in the event space, I do think it's a good idea to have speakers signed, booked on your website when you are selling tickets. All right, let's move into the 3 ways to book speakers and talent for your events. The first method that I want to talk about is your network. And this is by far the best way to get speakers or talent for your events. If there's somebody that you are trying to get to speak or perform at your event, and you're able to reach them through your network, and you can bypass all of the agents and all of the gatekeepers, that's going to save you so much trouble and probably a lot of money. And these speakers are also just so much easier to work with because they already know you, they're already connected, and there's already an established relationship. Even if it's not directly with that speaker, if they trust the person that you are connected to, then that causes there to already be a pre-established relationship. Most of the speakers that I have speak at my events are ones that we get to through not just my network, but our network as a company, as Fund Launch. We're connected to a lot of fund managers and a lot of people in the fund space. So whenever we're throwing an event, we can work that network and usually get 5 to 10 speakers signed for our event just by talking to people that we know are connected to the people that we're going after. I've always been kind of a hater on networking. I never really enjoyed it, and I always thought it was kind of funny when people said you need to hustle in college and you need to talk to people and meet as many people as possible and build your network, and your network is your net worth. But to a point, it's kind of true. I definitely wish I built out a much stronger network in college so that I had more people to reach out to when I was trying to get speakers, because there's some individuals I just couldn't reach. I just didn't know anybody that could get in contact with them. And that's when I have to try the next 2 methods, which definitely work, but they're not as ideal as using your network. So if you're trying to book speakers or talent, I'd highly recommend starting with your network and trying to get a few signed without reaching out to any assistants, agents, or whatever it is. All right, the second strategy to book speakers and talent for your event is to work your way in. Now, for those of you who are in the marketing world, I'm going to refer to this as the Dream 100 strategy. This is something that Russell Brunson from ClickFunnels talks about all the time. But basically, it's picking out the people that you want to have associated with your brand, and in this case, speakers or talent, and you begin building a relationship with them over time through a variety of different strategies. Now, a few strategies that I've used in the past that have actually worked pretty well are, number 1, just cold emails. If I can't get to a speaker through my network, one of the first things I do is I try to find their email online. Now, this might sound kind of creepy, but a really good tool to find people's emails online is Rocket Reach. You have to pay for it, but you get a bunch of credits when you do pay for it. And all you have to do is just search somebody's name in the search bar, and it'll scrape the entire internet for their contact information. Like I said, kind of creepy, but most of the speakers I've got in contact with through cold email outreach have been through Rocket Reach. So once I find a speaker that I'm going after and I get their email from Rocket Reach, I'll simply just send them an email introducing myself and introducing the brand of Fund Launch. Now, being completely transparent, this first email will pretty much never even get seen. Or maybe it gets seen and they just don't respond. However, the response rate that I've had on this first email is pretty much zero. So what I'll do then is I'll continue to follow up with that speaker. But then I will go and I will search the internet for that speaker's assistant or other people that are associated with that speaker or are on their team. And then I'll find their emails through Rocket Reach and I'll send similar emails to them, introducing myself, talking about the brand, and usually just getting straight to the point and saying, I'm trying to get in contact with blank because I want them to speak at this event. Something I've learned and also heard from a variety of different mentors is that you shouldn't really write fluffy, persuasive emails. You should honestly just get right to the point and tell them why you are reaching out to them. And I kind of agree with this. If someone's reaching out to me via email, I just want to know what they want. I don't really care about the persuasion and the marketing and the copywriting. If you tell me what you want and I'm interested in it, I'm probably going to respond and we can talk more. Now, some people might say otherwise, but that's just what I recommend. Other ways to work your way in are doing a lot of research on the speakers that you're trying to get in contact with and sending them a few packages, letters, and gifts that are associated with the research and the stuff that you find. So one of the speakers that we've been trying to land for a long time is Ray Dalio. And something that we did is we did a lot of research on him and we found that he's extremely into hunting and knives. So we decided that we were going to get him a hunting knife made out of, I think it was like a mammoth tusk. And it was going to be put in this very nice box for a great presentation. And we told ourselves that if we ever were in the position to meet Ray Dalio and talk to him, we were going to give him this knife. Now, we had this knife for about a year before one of my partners was actually going to have the chance to meet Ray Dalio himself. They were going to meet at a financial conference he was attending. And when the time finally came, he had the knife in his hands and he had to convince the security guards to let him pass because he had obviously a weapon. But when he got up to Ray and he gave him the knife, Ray was extremely impressed. My partner said that pretty much every person just stepped up, took a picture and left, but he sat there and talked to Ray Dalio for about 2.5 minutes. And that's a man who has a really expensive 2.5 minutes if you were to pay for it. And he was so touched and impressed by the knife that he said he wanted to write us a personal thank you letter. So he got our business address. Then he also connected him with his head of PR, who's the person who basically handles all of his bookings and speaking engagements. Now, we haven't signed Ray Dalio yet, but we're definitely the closest we've ever been. And that's because we did research, we found out he likes hunting and knives, and we were bold enough to try and give it to him in person. That's another great example of how to work your way in. All right, the final method that I want to talk about is buying your way in. Now, this is probably the easiest way to get speakers if you have a good budget for your speakers and your talent. But essentially what you do is you go to the speaking agent websites. One that I've worked with quite a bit is All American Speakers, and they're actually pretty legit. I enjoy their agents. They usually get me in contact with a variety of good options. However, when you're going into the agent route, you have to accept that you're going to be paying money and you're going to be paying more than you would if you were just working with the speaker because the agent has to get their commission. And there really isn't much room for negotiation here because you don't get to actually negotiate with the speaker or their team. You have to negotiate with the agent who's just trying to get their commission. So there's really no incentive for them to sign the speaker for a cheap amount because that means they get less money. Like I said, this is probably the most guaranteed way to get a speaker. If somebody's represented by this agent and they're available when you inquire on them, if you have the money and they're interested in your event, you're most likely going to land the speaker or talent. However, this is probably the most annoying and expensive option. One other thing I don't like about this route is you don't actually get to contact the speaker until just before the event. You essentially have to work with the agent to be the liaison between you and the speaker. And also you have to abide by a lot of the rules created by the agency, which are honestly kind of boring. You have to get all of your marketing assets pre-approved. You usually have to stick to their payment schedule. And like I said, you never actually get direct access to the speaker, which I think is super annoying. But for all the speakers I've signed through these agencies, it's all worked out. They've always showed up and they've delivered a really good presentation. And usually the speaker will be so impressed with your event and your team that they'll want to work with you more in the future. And that's when you just get their card or you get the number of their assistant and then you have that relationship established. So you usually only have to work with the agent for the first time. All right, now that we've covered the 3 methods for booking speakers and talent for your events, I just want to go through a few negotiating tips when it comes to getting speakers. The first one I want to talk about, which seems rather intuitive, is that it needs to be a win-win situation for yourself and for the speaker. And this actually does help a lot when you are trying to pitch the speaker to come speak at your event. Whether it's outright just paying paying them for their time, or it's giving them a platform to speak on, or it's giving their personal brand more exposure through leveraging your brand at the event and through your social media advertising. Whatever it is, you need to pitch it to them in a way that it's very obvious that it is a win-win for both you and them. Because obviously, if the speaker or talent doesn't see your engagement as something that will be beneficial to them, or it's equally a win-win between the two of you, they're most likely not going to take you up on your offer. So make sure you just keep that in mind. The next thing I want to mention is when you're discussing price with a speaker, I typically like to state the price I'm looking to pay them rather than asking them what their speaking price is. Because once you ask them, you really give them the opportunity to establish that boundary, and they can establish it as high or as low as they want. And it's typically on the high end. If there's a speaker and I ask them what their speaking price is and they say it's $100,000, the bar is now set at $100,000, and negotiating down is actually pretty difficult. It can happen, but you've given them control of the initial price anchor. And one thing to keep in mind is that they will usually give you a price point that is actually way higher than what they would be happy to speak for. Let me just think about it. If someone's asking you how much you charge for your time, that's your one opportunity to throw a number out there and hope that they say yes. And they probably think that you're going to try and negotiate them down, and they'll still probably walk away with a higher price point than they'd be happy to speak for. Going back to the $100,000 example, if they state $100,000 as their price point, but they'd really be happy to speak for $50,000, if you talk them down to $75,000, they're still going to walk away extremely happy because they're speaking for $75K instead of $50K. And you're going to think that you won, even though you actually could have gotten them for $50K or maybe even a little lower. So that's why I like to be the first one to drop the price. If I come in and say, I will pay you $50,000 to come speak, if that's something that they're happy with, they'll typically just say yes, and we will put pen to paper. However, that gives me the power of the price anchor, and then they have to negotiate up, which sometimes happens, but it usually stays around the price point that I initially establish. However, you'd be surprised at how many people just accept that first price point. The next tip I want to mention is to throw in other incentives for the speaker or the talent rather than just paying them. For example, if somebody is going to come speak at your event and you don't want to pay them, maybe reach out to them and say, hey, I would love for you to come and speak at our event. We're going to have this many people in the audience. You'll be speaking alongside all of these amazing speakers. And also we will pay for a first class ticket and lodging for you when you come and speak at the event. The perceived value of getting a first class ticket and also getting lodging covered is actually pretty high. And now that all of those expenses are covered, they're really just coming out and it's no cost to them. And yeah, it might not be as much as a $10,000 speaker fee, but that actually is a pretty valuable offer. And I've definitely had a lot of speakers take me up on that. Something else you can use as leverage to get other speakers or talent is to leverage the speakers that you currently have signed to get them to join you as well. At the last event I threw, the first two speakers we had signed were Ed Mylett, who's one of the most famous motivational speakers in the world, and also Jim Rogers, who is a legendary fund manager who is partners with George Soros, had $1 billion fund, one of the Wall Street greats. So when we came and we asked people to speak at the event as well, we typically wouldn't even offer them a speaking fee. We would say, hey, we'll cover your travel, we'll cover your lodging, and also you get to speak on stage next to Ed Mylett and Jim Rogers. You get put on the website next to them, and all of our ads, you'll be next to Ed Mylett and Jim Rogers. And it was actually a really key selling point because as a speaker, they can leverage that for their following. They can go and they can post on their social medias and say, I'm honored to speak at Fund Launch Live alongside Ed Mylett and Jim Rogers. And it's really big status boost and really strokes the ego. So if you have some high status speakers that you're trying to sign, you could go the route of signing a bunch of other high status speakers that maybe you have a connection to through your network or that you're willing to pay for through an agent. And then you go and you leverage them to get the other high status individuals. That's definitely a method that I've used that has worked pretty well. Something else that you can do is just really sell them on the vision of your event. Something I've learned from my time of throwing Fund Launch Live specifically, which is an event for emerging fund managers, is that a lot of people in the finance world just want to give back to people that are younger than them. They've made it, they've had a successful career, they started a fund, they cashed out, made a couple million, sometimes a couple billion. And now out of the goodness of their hearts, they actually just want to go and give back to the generation that's coming up after them. Now I know yours probably isn't finance, but whatever it is, if it's real estate, general entrepreneurship, marketing, investing in the stock market, whatever it is, if you can convince speakers and really sell them on the vision of your event and what you're trying to accomplish and what you're trying to give to the community and give to the attendees, sometimes that can be a really powerful selling point. We actually have a speaker that has spoken at every one of our Fund Launch Lives who doesn't want to accept any payments. They don't want us to cover any lodging or airfare. All they want to do is just come and speak to people and share their story, share their insights, and help the community of emerging fund managers as much as possible. A lot of people really do care about their legacy, and becoming a speaker and speaking at events is actually a really good way to solidify that legacy, so you can use that that as a selling point. All right, those are all the tips that I'm going to mention in this video. I'll most likely make a video in the future that has more negotiating tips for negotiating speakers. I might group that in with the video about negotiating venues and contracts there. There's a lot of tips when it comes to negotiating, but for the sake of time, I'm going to move on. Once you've signed the speaker, it's important that you maintain consistent communication with them, sending them event information, getting them excited, getting them hyped so that they stay invested, stay committed, and actually end up speaking at your event. Now, yes, you should definitely have a contract in place that makes them contractually obligated to speak at your event. And if they don't, you get a full refund, or they will make an attempt to replace themselves with equally valuable talent. However, I've definitely heard that it's pretty common for speakers to back out of speaking engagements, and it's very common for talent to back out of performances. So once I sign a speaker, I like to stay in contact with them. I'll usually give them updates on how many tickets we've sold. I'll begin to prep them for their presentation, let them know what they need to look out for, and just generally check in every once in a while. I'd also recommend just having one point of contact for the speaker just to keep it nice and simple for them. And it's also simple for you, whether that's actually you or someone from your team. If it's you, you have all the information and you know the speakers are going to be talking back and forth with you and you don't have to go find anyone else to get information. And if it's someone from your team, you know exactly who you need to go to when you are requesting speaker information. Some things I like to do for the speakers when we're actually at the event is, one, I like to give them a gift as a thank you for speaking at the event. And yes, maybe you paid them, or maybe you gave them some other type of compensation prior to the event. However, they're still doing a really good deed of speaking at your event and they're helping you out a ton. So I'd highly recommend treating them very well at the event itself and getting them some sort of gift. Even if it's super simple, something that's, $25-$50. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. Just give them something as a simple thank you. Then I also like to create a green room for them to hang out in before they speak, or at just any point throughout the event. Because typically the speakers or the talent at your events are going to be very hot commodities when it comes to the attendees flocking to them, asking them questions, asking for autographs. It's really nice for them to have an area to go to hang out where they don't have to worry about that. And it also kind of gives them that celebrity feel. Because at the events I throw, they're all in the finance world, so there's really not a ton of finance celebrities. However, when they come and they speak at our events, we try to give them that status and give them that experience of being a celebrity, just because it increases their experience and it'll make them very pleased with our brand, pleased with our team, and it'll make them want to work with us more in the future. I talk a lot about experience here. The attendee experience is very important. Your team's experience is very important, but also the speaker experience is very important, because these are partners that you're going to want to work with in the future, and you want to make a good impression on them so that they can go and they can tell other people in their network about how awesome your event and your brand is. All right, the last thing I'm going to talk about in this video is the speaker contract itself. I'm definitely going to be putting out more content about contracts in the future, but I definitely have a few tips that I want to mention here before I end the video. The first thing is, in the contract, you need to clearly communicate the compensation package and also the compensation timeline. Basically, that means what you're going to be giving them in exchange for their service of speaking at your event, and at what point you're going to be delivering these payments. Now, if you're not paying them and you're only getting them lodging and you're getting them travel or whatever it is, you still need to highlight inside of the contract when that is going to be delivered. And if you're going to be paying them, make sure it is clearly defined when all of the payments are due. Like I mentioned earlier, make sure there's a clause in there that states you will be guaranteed a refund if the speaker or talent cancels. And I also like to throw in something where they actually have the opportunity to find other talent to replace them that's equally as valuable. And then it's up to me to determine if they are equally valuable. And who knows, they might find someone that's a little better than them. I've never actually had this happen, but it's something that I throw into my contracts. Now, this tip is probably the most important tip out of all of the contract tips that I have and lessons that I've learned throughout my career as an event planner. And that is to always have a legal team review your contracts. Now, I know this might be difficult in the beginning when you don't have the budget for a legal team. We definitely didn't have a legal team review all of our contracts in the beginning, but now I do not sign a contract unless I have our lawyer read through it. And this has actually saved our butts quite a few times. And if you remember that story I told in one of the earlier phases about losing $72,000 because I missed something in the contract, that would have been easily avoided if I had a lawyer read the contract, because they would have brought that to my attention and I would have been aware of it. Most of the time when my lawyer reads through the contracts, I don't change anything. They tell me everything I already know, but every once in a while they find a nugget in there that is a lifesaver. So I'd highly recommend having a legal team review your contracts. The last thing I want to mention is, when you're making these contracts, try and get as many perks as possible. It really doesn't hurt to slide as much stuff in there as as you want. And at the very worst, they'll just take it out. A few things you can try and do is have them help out with promotion. Maybe it's going live with them on social media, or they send an email out to their newsletter, or they come onto your podcast and do an interview. Whatever it is, try and leverage their following to help sell tickets to your event. Something else I'd like to put in there is meet and greet opportunities, because that adds a ton of value for my attendees. And also I like to throw in there that they need to attend our VIP networking functions and our after parties, because similar to the last one, that adds a ton of value to the experience of my attendees. And it's also a really good selling point when I'm trying to sell tickets to the event. If inside of the VIP package, they get meet and greets with all the speakers and they get to hang out with the speakers at the after parties, it's a no-brainer to buy VIP over GA. Especially if you are the one that's making the contract, I would definitely try and throw in as many perks for you as possible. And most of the time, they don't really say anything. I've had a few speakers come back and say, hey, I'm not really comfortable with showing up to the after party, or I want to change this. I'm like, okay, it was worth a try. Like I said, I'm definitely going to be making more videos in the future about negotiation and also contracts. However, make sure you go down into the description below and check out the assets down there. And make sure you take a look at the speaker contract template that I have. This is the template that I use for all of the speakers and talent that I signed for my events. And you don't have to use it to a T, but I think there are definitely some ideas you can take from it and some things that you can copy over. And feel free to use it all. It's a plug and play template where you could easily just fill in all of your information and send it out to your speakers and talent. All right, that's all I have for you in this video, and I will see you in the next one.